Oh, is that my cue to go?
No, I got it. I got it.
Okay.
Well, welcome everyone here officially to the Gathering Place webinar with Dr. Nick Stucky on Sabbath and stopping for rest in a society that doesn't. So we are thrilled to have you all here with us today talking. And Nate, if you want to just jump on in and go ahead and get us started, that would be wonderful. And I will go ahead and at the very end sort of do some concluding remarks as well as yeah, letting you know about how to continue to keep the conversation going. But just for the meantime, if you're able to, if you have headphones, sometimes that helps to cut down on background noise, as well as if you have an option to push a mute button, that also kind of helps people, yeah, be able to hear what's going on. So, Nate, go ahead. It's up to you. Thanks so much for coming and joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. It is my privilege to join you all. I am in Princeton, New Jersey. Was saying earlier, I grew up in Kansas and went to Bethel, and then spent 6 years doing youth ministry on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, where I got married right out of college and then moved 1,300 miles for a half-time job at a church, which I think you only do that once in your life. But it was great, and then ended up being full-time between 3 churches in 3 different denominations, and it was a great experience. And Burl Brubaker, who is the lead pastor there where Nathan is, was the last lead pastor that I was under there. So had a great experience out there. Then went back to Kansas and farmed for a couple of years, and then came to Princeton so I could get, thought I was going to get an MA in youth ministry and then go back to work, and then ended up switching into the MDiv program, and then ended up getting into the PhD program, and was recently actually hired to stay here to lead a new initiative that we call the Farminary, and that integrates theological education and small-scale agriculture. But my dissertation was on young people and Sabbath, and the Sabbath stuff actually also influences this whole Farminary project, but that's another day. For today, for our time together, want us to focus on what it means to be in youth work, youth ministry, and try to take Sabbath seriously. Just so that we can kind of do the introduction piece, I would love for, I know we kind of did this already, but if everybody could just say your name and where you're at and sort of what's your relationship to youth ministry is. Or maybe it's not. Maybe you just stumbled across this thing, and so you're not in youth ministry in any formal way. So just to strategically unmute, Lois, why don't you get us started if you're willing?
Okay, I'm Lois, and I'm from Topeka, Kansas, for Southern Hills Mennonite Church, and I stumbled into youth ministry starting, I don't know, a while ago, with just being counselors, advisors, that type of stuff, and then eventually started working for the Church of the Brethren District of Western Plains in Kansas. And then I moved from that job into the Southern Hills position to work with youth and young adults.
Nice, nice. Thanks, Lois. Nathan.
I've been at Swamp Mennonite Church for 3.5 years as the associate pastor, so I do youth, but also music and worship. And there's some who think that should be religiously 50-50% split time, but realistically every week it's a little different. But I do both positions here, and that was really my first experience in youth ministry, was starting here 3.5 years ago.
Nice, nice. Thank you. Tori, are you there? I just see a picture of a guitar.
Yeah, I'm here. I had to move rooms. Yeah, Tori Dirksen, First Mennonite Church of Denver, and full-time children and youth faith formation. Yeah, I think that's enough.
Cool. Very good. Rachel, anything else you want to add about yourself? You're muted. Just
there
so
you go. Yeah, my unmute finger was going slow. I've got 3 boys, and I think just youth ministry speaks to my heart. I mean, I'm doing doing this job as the denominational minister for youth and young adults, and also see, this theme of Sabbath and self-care as being integral to doing what we do well. So, yeah, that's why I'm here.
Nice. Well, if other people are able to join us, we'll let them introduce themselves if they're lucky. So the part of what I appreciate about how you all are describing yourselves is that it seems clear to me that if we're going to talk about Sabbath, it needs to be in a way that connects with the reality of lives that are full, and usually leaning towards too full rather than not full enough. And so, I come at this as a spouse. I come at this as a father of 3 young children. I come at this after just, making my way through a PhD program, now starting a new position. And like none of that, pretty much none of that naturally lends itself towards this naturally recurring, restful rhythm of life. And yet we profess to worship a God who rests and who invites us to rest. And so how do we make sense of that? So in a second, we're going to get into sort of the nitty-gritty, and as we do, we're going to do something that might not work, but we're going to try it, and it's going to be an exercise in shared vulnerability. Nothing inappropriate, I promise. But to do this exercise, everyone's going to need some paper and a pen or a pencil, and you're going to have to write stuff down and then hold it up in front of the camera. It's going to be like a ridiculous hokey game show, or worse. So if you want to take 30 seconds and have something, grab something to write with or write on, whatever, we'll get to that. And as you're doing that, I just want to sort of make it explicit what our goals are for this. And I'm just going to hope. Looks like Tori had to get up for his paper and pen. I'm just going to, oh, there he is. I'm going to assume he can still hear or keep dancing back and forth. My goal for us in the next 45 minutes or so is that we could begin to construct a theologically vibrant conception of the Sabbath. And so when I say theologically vibrant, I mean a conception of the Sabbath that begins with who God is and God's life and action, as opposed to the old blue laws, or as opposed to social or cultural norms, understanding that God always comes to us in the midst of our cultural and social contexts, but wanting to be intentional about who is God as it concerns Sabbath and what is that, how does that impact us. Tori, were you able to catch all that? You can just nod. Yes, no. No, okay, great. But it looks like you got paper, so we'll go with that. All that to say, the goal here is a theologically vibrant conception of the Sabbath. So as we move in that direction, I'm going to invite everybody to unmute, and I just want us to discuss briefly, why did you sign up for this particular seminar? Like, what is your motivation here? And why did you sign up, and what do you hope I'll say? Those are the two sort of first discussion questions, and anybody's welcome to respond.
I was just intrigued by the title and the information that you were going to share about how we can incorporate our busy lives and still have rest.
Nice. What do you hope I'll say?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. Tori or Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, I work pretty intentionally at taking a Sabbath, but it's not easy, and not all weeks it works out perfectly. But I hope that on my monthly report I can say that I was at a denominationally led facilitated conversation with Rachel and Nate and others, and that they encourage youth pastors to still go, this would be the hope for what you'll say, to unplug from technology, be okay with completely turning cell phones off for 24 hours or more, and that the church and people will still thrive, and they don't need 24/7 access to us, which isn't a habit of my church, but it's amazing the looks I get when I tell them that I turn my cell phone off at night.
Yeah. Wow.
Or for a full 24-hour Sabbath.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Tori.
And how ironic is it that we're connecting via technology, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I've been realizing over the past year and a half, 2 years, that Sabbath is probably a weak point for me. And actually this summer I'm doing some spiritual direction work with John Drescher Lehman, if anybody is familiar with him, and kind of exploring what maybe some tools that I can use to do Sabbath better. So I guess if there's something I'd be looking for you to say, it would be maybe some practical, what does it look like to actually live out Sabbath. And I guess for me, I've been thinking about or exploring the idea that Sabbath isn't necessarily a day, but it's more of a way of life. And so what does it look like every day to take those moments of Sabbath? Yeah.
Nice. No, that's really helpful. Rachel?
Yeah, like I alluded to a little bit before, like I feel like just youth ministry in general is so just go, all hours. And I feel like this is, I mean, we have a problem with youth ministers, generally, I don't know, in positions for less than 3 years, and what does that mean? Why are we burning out so quickly? And just even if you're a youth minister or not, burnout happens, and how can we take care of ourselves in the midst of the work that we're doing so that we can actually do the work that we're called to do rather than frying out. So I hope that you can give us some practical tips also as far as, so how do we actually make that happen and invite people that we work with who are also feeling that same sort of pull and drive and whatever to also find and reclaim Sabbath in their own lives.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think it's worth naming, and this isn't news, I don't think, to anybody, but it's worth naming that culturally at large there is a bias, I believe, toward constant motion, towards sort of 24/7 stimulation, whether it's by way of technology or other entertainment or whatever. On top of that, there is the, quote, Protestant work ethic, which is we get stuff done. On top of that is the Mennonite work ethic, which to me is like, yeah, the Protestants, the mainliners, they think they have a work ethic, and then there's us, we actually really know how to work. And so like there's all these layers of baggage that we bring, and it all sort of pushes against rest in a way that is restorative and in a way that sort of brings us life. So that's part of what we're up against. Here's where we're going, just so you have a sense of the itinerary. I want to begin by talking about Sabbath grace and Sabbath as a gift. All right, that's kind of where we're going to go next. After that, I want to talk about Sabbath disorientation, and to put it most starkly, I would talk about Sabbath as a practice in death, and then ultimately, I want us to land on the practical implications, as in, so what does this actually mean for us? How might we live this invitation out in our lives? And some of that's already come out. To give credit where credit's due, theologically, Karl Barth is a big influence. Jürgen Moltmann, Abraham Heschel, the Jewish theologian. Life itself is a pretty good teacher in a variety of ways, and I'm increasingly influenced by agrarian thought. Ellen Davis out of Duke, and Wendell Berry and Norman Wiersbe. So I'm just trying to give credit where credit's due. I'm not going to name them anymore, but just so you know, that's kind of where I've been drinking. And Scripture, let's just name it. Scripture, also very important. All right, now, go ahead, Tori.
Would you have a bibliography or a quick note sheet that you could post somewhere in case we want to read up more?
That could be arranged. Yeah. That's a great idea. I could send you my dissertation. That might be a little. Actually, it might lead you to rest or put you to sleep really quickly. So it might actually be the practical thing. Anyway, so it's hokey game show time. Normally I would do this by way of like a slideshow or whatever, but because it's the few of us, and if I put up a slideshow, then I can't see your faces, and I'll do that in a second. But so what I want us to do for trying to get a theological conception of the Sabbath is to start at the very beginning. Julie Andrews once said that's a very good place to start, and so Genesis 1:1 to 2:3, this creation account, and we're just going to go through the first 7 days. And so what I'm going to do is ask you what was created on these days. And it's just going to be sort of like flash mob dating kind of thing, where I'm just going to say day 1, and then I want you to write down what was created on day 1. And then, so don't get your Bibles out. That would be cheating at this point. But so day 1 is the easy one, I think. The question is, what did God create on day 1? And you can go and then this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to count down from 10, and then when I get to 0, you have to hold up your paper, and if it doesn't say anything, we'll know you didn't know. At least you didn't know off the top of your head. So we're at 7, 6, 5, 4. God said, let there be. 4, 3, 2, 1. What you got? Hold it up in front of the camera. All right. I see light. Yeah, it's hard. Okay, so light is right. So God, day 1, God says light, and God sees that it's good. And my question for you simply is, what are human beings doing at this point in the story? Nothing, right? They don't exist. They're not doing anything. All right. Day 2, God creates 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What do you got? I hear heaven. I see heaven and earth. I see land and sea, waters, sky, something. Right. So depending on how the translation goes, it's the dome, it's the sky. So we got some points there for some people. And the question again is, what are humans doing at that point in the story? Nothing. They don't exist, right? So day 3, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Day 3, what do you got? Keep putting up the same thing. That's great. I see some land. I see land and water. Good. So there's the separation of the dry land from the sea. There's vegetation. And again, humans at this point in the story are not doing anything. They don't exist. Day 4, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fish question mark. Plans. Lois. Lois, nothing. Mars, moon. Oh, I think I saw. So sun, moon, and sun, moon, and stars. Mars, actually, I think we can count in that. That's what you wrote. But anyway, so there's the sun, moon, and stars, and again, humans aren't doing anything. Humans aren't doing anything. They don't exist yet, and so to prevent this from lasting the entire hour, day 5. God creates creatures for the sea and the air. There's birds of the air. There's all the creatures in the sea. And again, humans don't exist yet. And then finally, day 6, what does God create? This one I wish to write down. 9, 8, 7, day 6, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Day 6. What do we got? We've got Adam and Eve. I see SU something. That might have been stop playing this game, Nate. So day 6 is the land creatures to begin with, all the mammals, presumably the creeping things along the ground, and then God creates the first humans in the image of God, male and female. God creates them. So finally, there is that. And then, day 7, what happens on day 7? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Day 7. Rest. 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 Excellent. Excellent. So here, now I'm going to attempt to do a screen share so you all can... wow, I'm not seeing what I want to share. That's interesting. We'll try again. Maybe.
Can you open it back up in your PowerPoint?
Yeah, I am not. There were brief technical difficulties here.
In the meantime, we can all group chat.
Yes, you can. Are you seeing that?
Oh, nope.
Can you see the slide now?
No.
No. Well, that's really unfortunate. I promise we tested this before, and it was and it worked.
Rachel, when's the registration deadline for the January Youth Ministry Council gathering?
Oh, Nate or Tori, I haven't even thought about it.
Okay.
Let's probably sometime October.
Okay.
Yeah. November, maybe November. Good question. Oh, I'm sorry, Nate. This is a bummer.
Yeah, these things happen. So this is what I'm going to do.
Can you email it to me real quick while you're doing it?
Wow. See, you assume a level of technological proficiency that may far surpass who I am. Which is why we should take a break from technology when we are... All right, so this is what you could do, Rachel. Could you, while I'm trying to make this work, do you own a Bible?
I have a Bible. I have a Bible behind me, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Could you grab it and then read Genesis 2, 1 to 3?
Yep.
You all can, if you have Bibles, you can pull that out.
Alrighty. Can y'all hear me? Genesis, Exodus, I'm just kidding. Okay, Genesis 2, 1 to 3. Here we go. It starts by saying thus, but it's really the NRSV. Here we go. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation.
Are you seeing it now?
Yes, I see it.
It's a miracle. That's wonderful. All right, so this is so finally we get to day 7. And the heavens and the earth are finished, and all their multitude, and on the seventh day God finishes this work, and God rests on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. So unmute if you're not already unmuted. And my question is, what does this story, the very first story that is found in Scripture, reveal about who God is?
Not a workaholic.
Okay, I like that. What else?
A God who blesses things and sets things apart.
Yeah, very good. And so interesting to note that in the rabbinical Jewish texts, they make a big deal out of the fact that the Sabbath day, it's not the first occasion of God blessing something. God blesses animals and God blesses humans, but the Sabbath day is the only piece of this creation text that a space in time is created. So it's a blessed time as opposed to a blessed thing. So that's kind of interesting. What else do we learn about God here?
That, I guess in a sense God has a certain rhythm, so he takes time to pause, to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. So the roots of the word Sabbath simply mean to stop. And so God does this. Like, I think it's just worth recognizing God rests. And like somehow that is part of who God is. And I think that's a really big deal. Anything else to add about what we learn about God through this?
Well, he values everything, like all aspects of his life and our lives and creation.
Yeah, say more, Lois.
He takes, time for every little thing as he creates it, and then he rests. Like, it's just one of those things letting us know that everything we do is sacred. It's not just this time on Sabbath or church or worship. It's everything that we do is very sacred.
Yeah. So when the Swiss theologian Karl Barth is exegeting this passage here, he says that the first thing that this passage reveals about God is that God is love. And the reason that is because God is not a God who has no time for creation. But instead, God, has found the object of God's love and therefore is in relationship with the creation and therefore demonstrates God's love. So yeah, I think it's I love it that this idea that the Sabbath is a picture of God's love for humanity and for all creation. Anything else about what the story here is telling us about who God is? Is everybody there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry. I'm going to go ahead and make this go away, I think. All right, now are you seeing my face again?
No.
Not so much.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
Oh, now you are?
I see your little thumbnail, but yeah, yep.
Now I'm back. All right. It's probably more pleasant to look at the PowerPoint. Anyway, so the next question then is, what is the story? And we're getting at this as we start talking about love. But what does the story reveal about the nature of the relationship between God and creation? Any ideas on that? Like what kind of a picture is drawn here as far as what's happening there with God and the relationship to create? Let me just, I'll pause and give you a chance to respond.
I guess a question that it brings to my mind is, what was God doing as he rested? So, I mean, there's almost a picture of God being in creation. So he's created and now he's resting, but it's not like he went away somewhere, but now he's being with.
Yeah. I think, I would agree with that, Karl Barth. Others would agree with that. This notion that what's happening here is not God ceasing creation and going off somewhere else, but rather creating and then being in relationship with. So if the text was still up there, you would see, so God thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done. And there, in the NRSV, it's a confusing use of the word finished. Listen to it again. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished. It seems to look back. This creation is done. But then it goes on, and on the seventh day, God finished the work. So how is it that creation is finished but then on the seventh day, God finished it. And part of what's happening there is this notion that creation, I mean, if we want to impose more sort of contemporary terms, like the material order is finished, and yet creation remains incomplete apart from Sabbath rest, apart from God's Sabbath rest. And I think that many of us have this sense, I think our young people can have this sense intuitively that our lives are somehow incomplete or less than fulfilled, less than what they were intended to be when they exist in a way that includes no rest. And that to me is one of the most compelling pictures of what emerges here in this first story, is that creation, humanity, remains incomplete and unfinished apart from Sabbath rest and God's own rest, and that God comes and relates to us in the Sabbath. And it's by virtue of God's care for and attention to us, as opposed to God staying busy with creation. So another thing that emerges here from the story is there's this question of what's going on with humankind, and recognizing that the seventh day of creation, if we just sort of read the story as, at face value, and for the record, I'm not imposing any scientific categories here for this. I'm just trying to, so Bar refers to it as a saga. It's this story that's supposed to tell us something important about who God is and who we are in the created order. So what's going on with humanity is, if we recognize that the seventh day of creation is the first full day of existence for humankind. At this point in the story, humans have no work of their own to reflect on. Although they do have a handy-dandy job description and a blessing from God. On the sixth day they're created, and God blesses them, says, be fruitful, multiply, have dominion over, which, for handy translation, I think, be stewards of creation. And so day 7, it seems like they should get busy, get to work. There you are, be fruitful, multiply, be good stewards. But that's not how the story goes. Instead, on day 7, there is God's sacred rest and the implied invitation to all creation to be a part of that. At that point in the story, there's no way that the humans could say, well, we earned this rest. Look at everything we did. We got enough work done, and now we can rest. Instead, it's simply a gift of grace. That to me is, that's part one. Sabbath as a gift of grace. I'm going to try to bring back the slideshow, and for some reason it just goes away after I share it and stop sharing it. Then it goes away. So forget that. I'm just going to read it from my notes. And this is so I'm fast forwarding to the 2 versions of the 10 Commandments, one in Exodus, one in Deuteronomy, and so they're very similar, but they give different reasons why the Israelites are supposed to observe the Sabbath. Just little trivia: the Sabbath command of all 10 commandments, the Sabbath one is the longest. There's more words for that commandment than any others, and it is the hinge or the linchpin between the sort of vertical commandments of the first table, the ones that are directed toward God, no idols, no other gods before me, don't misuse God's name, and those, the ethical horizontal ones on the second table, which are honor your father and mother, don't steal, don't murder, all that kind of stuff. But in the middle is the Sabbath command, the longest command, that includes both. This and so the Exodus version says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. So it's to the Lord. There's the vertical. You shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. So there's this horizontal dimension too. It is to the Lord, and it's not just for you. There's this ethical dimension to it as well. And the reason why: for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. So the rationale here is you need to observe the Sabbath, remember the Sabbath, and why should you do that? Because that's what God did at creation. So again, the only one of the 10 commands that invites explicit invitation of God. You did it because God did it first. No other commandments are structured in that way. So again, just lifting up the sort of unique dimensions of the Sabbath. Do it because God did it at creation. Now, fast forward to Deuteronomy and the Ten Commandments there. I'm in Deuteronomy 5, and it starts off very similar. Observe the Sabbath, keep it holy. 6 days do your work. It's for you, your children, your servants, your livestock. An interesting implication there for broader creation. Resident aliens, the whole thing. But then the rationale is different. Why? Verse 15, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath. So Exodus, you do it because, remember the Sabbath, keep it holy, because God did it first at creation. Exodus, it's remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Why? Because God brought you out of Egypt with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Remember that there was a time when Sabbath was not an option for you. And God delivered you from that. So now, the question is, what is the common thread that ties together the, and the thread I'm looking for here is the rationale. What makes Sabbath possible? And it's common between the Genesis story, the Exodus version of the Sabbath command, and the Deuteronomy version of the Sabbath command. Anybody have any guesses on that?
I mean, it's all grace, so it's the work of God that allows us to not work.
Yeah, bingo. You should put it on your paper, hold it up. That's great. No, you did the right thing, unmuting and talking. This is the common thread. Like on day 7, it's not because humans got enough done. It was a gift of grace. In Exodus 20, that version, why should you do this? Do it because God did it first, not because you got enough done, or because you're good enough or smart enough, or because enough people like you, but because God did it first. And then the Exodus or the Deuteronomy version of the commandment, why do this? Because God delivered you from Egypt. There was a time you couldn't do it, but by God's grace that now you can. So my question then for us, and I would love for us to discuss this for a couple minutes, is how does this notion of Sabbath as a gift of sheer grace compare with the conceptions of Sabbath that we've inherited by way of our theological tradition or our cultural tradition or the intermingling of those things? Sabbath as grace versus, I don't know, is that what we've learned, or has it been something different?
So I just talked, but I'll chime in again here. Because just this morning I was making up, I do a weekly schedule that is kind of like a weekly rhythmic schedule. And I was redoing it, and on Monday is kind of my day at home, and so I have a period of time that I have labeled as Sabbath, and then I have a period of time that's like for personal work and things that need to get done at home. And I just flip-flop them because what usually ends up happening is I wake up and don't get anything done till like 1 o'clock, and then from 1 my wife comes home around 3:30, and it feels like I haven't done anything, which was the plan. Like I have Sabbath first, and then I work second. And I just flipped it because I'm like, if I just worked first, then I could rest and not have all this stuff that still needs to be done. So anyways, that's I guess that's my cultural inheriting.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is you're not the first person who has done just that. So what else as far as this notion of Sabbath as grace versus something else that we've inherited? What strikes you?
Yeah, I think we just wrestle on when we've earned a Sabbath or not. What we have to do to achieve or earn, because so much of our, if you're going to say economic system, let alone Mennonite and Christian sensibilities, we like to say grace, but we're much more comfortable about what we earn.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Lois, does that resonate, or different perspective from where you're at?
No, that resonates very much, of it feeling like you have to work really hard before you can even rest, or you have to get everything accomplished before you can rest. So yeah, that resonated very well.
Yeah, and I just want to just name again that this the reality of this strikes at a very sort of visceral, emotional, yeah, this like I feel it like so. My daily rhythm is come to the office and make a list of the stuff that I need to do for that day, and I like to think I'm good at that. Like I like to think I'm good at making a list that's just long enough so that I can get it done. And maybe if it's a really good day, I'll get it done with a little time to spare. I can do a few extra things. But it was just like, every other day now, trying to start this new position, I'll think I can get A, B, and C done, and I get half of A done, and then it's time to go home. And like it throws me off emotionally to go home and to not have done what I'm supposed to have done. And so this gets to this part 2 here, which is this Sabbath disorientation. And the story scripturally, exegetically, that I want to just lift up here is this story of the Israelites held captive in Egypt and then moving into the wilderness and God's deliverance. Now, I'm landing here on Exodus 16, and so they've come out. There's been the plagues, then they're through the Red or the Reed Sea, and they get to the wilderness. Well, they get over the Red Sea, and there's jubilation, and they're so excited, and they're the horse and the rider are thrown into the sea, and that whole thing. But then they go just a little bit farther. They're just a couple weeks past, and like the food runs out, and they complain. And I actually have quite a bit of sympathy for complaining when the food runs out. And so they're there, and they're trying to figure out what to do. And so they cry out to God or to Moses and say, "Why did you bring us here? We'd have been better off in Egypt, where we ate as much as we wanted to." And so God responds to that by providing manna and a Sabbath rhythm all in one. And so the instruction it's on days 1 through 5, you go out and you get enough for that day. On day 6, you go out and you get a double portion, and on day 7, you stay in your tents, and it's a Sabbath to the Lord. And of course, the Israelites struggle to follow the rules. There's some of them that go out and they want to save some back for the next day, but then it turns to maggots and it smells foul. And then there are those who get up on the 7th day and they go looking for manna that's not there. And so my question for us is, why would God do this? Like, why respond to the need for food with manna and Sabbath all wrapped into one, as opposed to what seems like a much simpler solution, which is just provide manna every day, go get your portion, and then move on. What's going on here? Why manna and Sabbath all in one?
I think food talks, right? I mean, like, that's like the currency that God had to negotiate with. I mean, it's really, yeah, I think God knew that we weren't necessarily going to listen. We wanted to, I don't know, get our food, make sure we have enough, and if it was connected with this Sabbath, I don't know, maybe that's just the best way God knew that we would actually take it. Because if you can't collect too much, and if you go out and it's not there, you're sort of stuck with taking a Sabbath.
Right. Yep. I think the food thing ups the motivation, certainly. What else?
I mean, God doesn't work on the Sabbath, so He couldn't have created manna then, right?
Well, we won't limit God's ability here, but maybe that's like, hold on, I'm napping, okay? So I think the perspective I would invite us into is just a recognition of where the Israelites have come from, and this notion of how do you measure the worth of an Israelite in Egypt? It's actually pretty simple, and it is, how many bricks can you produce? And you are worth in that economy, in that context, you're worth as much as you can produce. And they show up in the wilderness after 430 years in Egypt, and generations upon generations of this identity as a people who are captive and whose worth is measured by how much they can produce. And they get to the wilderness, and the monumental task that God has for God's people is, how do I teach them that their identity is not a captive people, but a people who will be known by their faith and their trust in God. So the question is, what does it take to only gather enough for a day to eat all of that and then to go to sleep? What does it take to go ahead and gather the double portion on day 6 and then stay home on the 7th? It takes, as far as I can tell, a pretty serious trust in God as provider, in God as source of daily bread. And it pushes back overwhelmingly on the notion that their identity, first and foremost, is as producer. So we're trying, as far as I can tell, this story in Exodus 16 is a story of God slowly but surely reforming the identity of God's people. Saying, you have been known as a captive people who were only worth as many bricks as you can produce. No longer. Now you are a people set free by God who are known for their radical trust of God's provision in barren places, in places where we don't know who we are, in places where we have hunger and we have needs that we can't meet ourselves. But I think it's too easy to read the story and just say, well, those stupid Israelites, like this is always what they're doing. They get simple instructions and they can't do it. And I don't think that's it. In fact, I think it's a legitimate interpretation of the text to say they come into the wilderness. God gives them this instruction about just 1 omer per day, and then 2 omers on the 6th day, and then none on the 7th. I think it's possible that they get into the wilderness, they're so disoriented that when God gives them this instruction of 1 omer per day, he's actually speaking their language. They get that God gives them a quota. Your quota is 1 omer a day. They've been doing quotas for generations. And surely in Egypt, this the extra production, like if your quota was, 20 bricks, surely 25 bricks cashed out in favors with the Egyptian overlords. I don't know. It seems logical enough. Is it possible then that the ones who are in the desert, who are trying to gather extra and save some for tomorrow and go out extra on the 7th, this has nothing to do with disobedience. This has to do with trying to win God's favor. You're actually trying to please God as opposed to being disobedient to God. And isn't that what we do in ministry all the time? If God is happy with me doing this and this and this for the young people, then surely God's going to be even happier with me if I do all these things in addition to all these things. And what if in the midst of that, God's saying, no, you missed the point. The relationship between God and humanity and all creation from the beginning has been based on grace, on God coming to us and saying, stop and rest, not because you earned it, not because you got enough done, but because you're mine. Because I created you. And because there is something more to our existence than what we can produce or what we can achieve, there is this sacred relationship. And so time is flying by at a depressingly quick rate. So my question is this. Does it make sense? Can you see like the Sabbath as this massive disorienting force? And so like the Israelites get into Egypt, and there's like the Sabbath totally throws them off. It challenges their identity, and I would go so far as to say it calls for the death of an insufficient identity so that a new identity can emerge. How does that sit? Does it make sense? Questions, comments?
Well, I wonder if tied to this, I don't know how tied, but intertwined, is how many hours, if you want to put time on it, like if productivity isn't necessarily the task getting done, that can be, one way of showing our productivity, but hours spent, and what is a healthy, boundaries with congregations, because they might say, sure, take 24 hours off, as long as nobody says this, but on the ridiculous extreme, as long as you're working 80 hours a week, I'm fine if you take 24 hours off. So to keep that, and I think it was mentioned earlier, to keep that, the Sabbath as a lifestyle instead of just focusing on the to-do list of a 24-hour or whatever your boundaries are. So I don't know if you want to speak into that at all or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge, and so the next sort of logical text to look at is Jesus' interaction with the Pharisees as far as the Sabbath was concerned. And the irony of that is that the Pharisees are convinced that the Sabbath is extremely important. And there's always this clash between Jesus and the Pharisees about what is lawful and what's not lawful. My interpretation of that is that the Sabbath there also is disorienting. The Sabbath, in its true sense of a gift of grace, is disorienting to the Pharisees because they want to reduce it to a list of do's and don'ts. So again, it's shifting our focus of what Sabbath is from what we do to what God does, from who we are as far as on our own to who we are in the light of God's grace. So there's always the temptation to twist this into it's about what we can do or accomplish, and I just think every time that misses the point. So I don't know if that answers your question, Tori.
I mean, I hear where you're going, but I think the healthy conversation is to think through pastors and ministers, let alone youth ministers, and creating, the healthy boundaries overall. And yeah. I would love to see where it starts with Sabbath and then trickles into the rest of best practices and boundaries, and being able, for me, it often goes to offering our best instead of getting burned out within 2 or 3 years, or frustrated and looking for a different job that either pays more, if that's another way to quantify. I'm not even talking about payment. But yeah, conversations on I'm going to go somewhere where either I can get more money or get the same amount of money for a far less stressful work environment. So yeah, I don't, and maybe that's not a fair question to ask you or not, but I've been in 4 different churches that all have different expectations from the congregation, let alone different expectations that pastors and youth pastors put on themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's those are issues that we have to wrestle with, and what I want to lift up out of that is what are the theological implications of a life that knows no rest, or a life that would always look down on rest, that would say that's second to our work, and I think the greatest risk in all of that, and I know that we're guilty of it, is communicating something very different than the gospel. If the gospel centers on God's grace and love for us, and our lives communicate endless motion, then the natural proclamation of our lives is going to be works righteousness or some other perversion of the gospel, as opposed to the idea, and this is true to the Anabaptist roots, that the pattern of our life itself and our common life together proclaims something powerful. So is it possible that in our receiving, so I actually want to flip the language. We talk about taking a Sabbath. I think that's wrong. I think we need to talk about receiving a Sabbath, recognizing that it's not a commodity we pull off the shelf, but that it's a gift that we receive from God. Is it possible that ministry happens, proclamation happens by way of the Sabbath that can't happen in any other way? And I think that's what's going on partly with the Israelites in the wilderness, is that there's formation that takes place by way of that Sabbath stoppage that can't happen if you just keep going. So I think, that's helpful. What you said. I don't know if what I said was, but what you said was helpful.
Yeah, I guess, but what you were saying before, really connected with me, and what my response or thought was, I don't know that I work more necessarily to earn God's favor, because that's something I'm constantly reminded of and have been taught well, that, we don't have to work to earn God's favor, but I find myself working more to earn the congregation's favor.
Yeah.
And so my thought was, well, yeah, that would be nice if God was my boss, but so often I find myself working for the congregation, and so maybe it's a healthy reminder for me that God is my boss. And then, like you're saying, it ends up being a proclamation when I take the rest, and maybe I'm asked why wasn't X, Y, or Z done, to be able to say, because ultimately God is my boss, and God has called me into rest, when at the time it was more important to spend some time in prayer or whatever else that time of Sabbath looked like. And it can actually be a way of talking about grace and Sabbath with people in the congregation then.
Yeah, and I don't want to make this sound like it's easy or simple, which is why I want to talk about Sabbath as a practice in death, because I think there's all kinds of things that have to die in order for this to kind of emerge. And we are placed in different contexts, and like Tori said, you've been in 4 different congregations with 4 different sets of expectations, 4 different cultures, 4 different every congregation is its own little thing or big thing, and so we there's a lot of discernment that has to go on as far as deciphering how do we do this. But again, there's this sort of dangerous there are dangerous theological assumptions about what it means if the kingdom of God is actually dependent on how much we accomplish. Like, that's just really shaky ground. But at the same time, if we're going to hold on to this sort of radical discipleship of the Anabaptist heritage, how do we do that too? So it's, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive. All right, it's after 2 o'clock already, and we still have to talk about practical implications. If you have to, can we have 4 more minutes? Is everybody good for 4 more minutes? Okay. So, I mean, all this moves toward, okay, so what do we do? I don't have 3 easy steps, just for spoiler alert. But I do think there's something instructive, again, about looking at the Pharisees, about looking at the Israelites. And it seems to me that the Israelites show up in the wilderness, and they get hungry, and God provides manna. And in asking them to not go out and gather manna on the 7th day, God is inviting them to not do something on which it appears their lives depend. They could make this sort of biological case that, no, our lives actually depend on this manna. We'll die without it. And God says, no, don't do that. Don't do that for a day. Why? So that you can remember that your life does not ultimately depend on manna. It depends on the one who gives the manna. For the Pharisees, there is this sense, and maybe even more acute than for the Israelites, there's this sense that their lives depend on the law, on proper keeping of the law. And it seems like Jesus' invitation to the Pharisees is, no, put down your legalism for the day. Why? So that you can realize that, like, that legalism, that sort of hyperactive attention to the minutia of the law cannot save you. And so what I wonder for us is, what are the things that tempt us to believe our lives depend on them? That we might begin to receive God's rest as we put those things down. Now recognize, like, the manna thing, if they put it down for a day, they pick it back up. So if we were all in the same space, I'd do this thing with rubber ducks, and I would show a video of Ernie trying to learn to play the saxophone from Hoots the Owl on Sesame Street, and Hoots the Owl sings, you got to put down the ducky if you want to play the saxophone. The ducky's a good thing. It's just that Ernie has to put it down if he wants this other good thing, which is to play the saxophone. And I think our work in ministry is like this. Like, there's this other good thing, this identity, this rest that can be ours, but it can only be ours as we put down these other things that tempt us to believe our lives depend on them. Tori mentioned the cell phone thing from the beginning. Good grief. Like, this is so prevalent, and maybe even more so now for, like, millennials, those who aren't in high school, those just older than high school, than even for our high schoolers, to think, no, actually my life does depend on that cell phone. And or your congregation thinks your life depends on that cell phone. And so could it be that turning off cell phone for 4 hours or 6 hours or 24 hours could be this exercise in, I refuse to reduce my life to that thing. My life cannot ultimately depend on that. It has to depend on God's grace. So as we move towards kind of wrapping this up, before we do that, does that make sense? Does this notion that like maybe an entree into Sabbath practical practice is putting down the thing that tempts us to believe our life depends on it? So for me, as I was working on my way through the PhD program, it was extremely easy, that temptation to like, no, got to write a dissertation. And I could make all kinds of strong arguments for, no, actually my life does depend on getting that done. So for me, Sabbath practice through that season of life was, I will not work on that dissertation for 1 day a week. And I did it because I knew that by not doing that, it would be way too easy to stake too much of my identity on that body of work. And I had to remember, especially if you're going to write a dissertation on it, I had to remember my life could not depend on it. My life depended on God's grace and provision. And then that became, that enlivened the other work along the way. So does this make sense, this idea of putting down things that tempt us to believe our lives depend on them? Questions, comments before we wrap it up?
I guess a question I have that I don't know if it's a quick one or not, but so what is it that we're picking up then? Like, what does Sabbath look like? Because I know, so for me personally, it's easy to end up filling Sabbath time with entertainment, which isn't really Sabbath then, or filling Sabbath time with I don't know what, like there's different things that'll end up, sometimes during my Sabbath time I'll end up baking bread, which is enjoyable, but then I ask the question of, is it really Sabbath? And I don't know, like what is it when we're putting down the thing our life depends on? What is it that we pick up?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. A and B, if I was going to give you homework, I'd say go and read through the Gospels and read all the stories that involve Jesus and Sabbath. And as I read those, there's sort of this consistent telos, and I think it goes back to the Old Testament as well, but that the Sabbath moves us toward life. It moves us toward refreshment, recreation, as in recreation. It moves us toward the community of faith. And this is tricky when we work in churches, but I think it's extremely important to find people to receive rest with, whether it's, the family or another, community, get on Google Hangout. Find ways to connect with other people, and I think that's really important. And another consistent telos, very specifically or explicitly in the Exodus story, and also in Luke 13, that the reason that Moses keeps going to Pharaoh and saying, let the people go, the reason why was so that they could go worship God. Luke 13, the story of Jesus in the synagogue, there's a woman there, she appears, the text says she's doubled over, she's bent over, she hasn't stood up straight in 18 years or 13 years, something like that. And there's this story of radical grace where Jesus sees her and calls her over and lays his hands on her and heals her. And in the Greek, there's 4 action verbs attributed to Jesus before there's any action verb attributed to this woman. So again, it just seems like grace. She didn't ask for it. There's no mention of her having any faith. We don't even know if she knows who Jesus is. Jesus just comes and heals this woman. And then she stands up straight and praises God. That is her response. So I think we can't go wrong in putting down our stuff and standing up straight and praising God. And if we can do that in the company of other believers, like that to me in some ways is the paradigmatic Sabbath practice is praising God. And there's, a lot of different ways to do that. So other questions, comments as we wrap up? All right. Well, I apologize for poor time management and taking you, 9 minutes past the agreed upon my contract said don't go over 2. So anyway, it's I felt like I just had to work harder to earn and then I'd be okay.
Nate, thank you so much. I think this hour it looks like by the head shakings, and I would definitely concur that this was such a rich time with you. And I wrote over in the little group chat, preach. At one point you were on a roll, and I was like, yes, this is exactly what Sabbath is about. And thank you so much for offering your wisdom to this topic, and and speaking directly, I think, to our souls that are longing for what Sabbath looks like and can look like in our lives, as we also invite others that are in our congregations to join in and why we all need Sabbath and what that can look like. So very, very well done, and thanks for offering yourself this time. And to keep the conversation going for everyone else, we are actually next Wednesday on the 29th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time doing our study circle conversation. If you want to talk more about specific pragmatic ways of what Sabbath can look like in our own lives, reading the book called Sacred Pauses by April Yamasaki. In each chapter, she offers various different ways of Sabbath practices to pause in the midst of our day, to embrace the Sabbath lifestyle. So feel free to join us for that too. But also on The Gathering Place, www.thegatheringplace.us. We also have forum chats, so you can go on if you want to continue the conversation. That's a great place to do that as well. So thanks again for joining in, and stay connected to The Gathering Place to find out about next month's offerings. And again, Nate, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll only add one more little thing, and that is, if you stink at this, you're in good company. And it's just worth recognizing that the Israelites are in the wilderness for a generation. And maybe the hope for Sabbath is just as much or more for our young people and our children, that they might see it as we struggle through this and with this. And all that to say, I think God has the long view in mind here, and there's the temptation to want to just have it, and I got this Sabbath thing. That's not been my experience at all. So I hope that you will embark on a lifelong Sabbath journey for the sake of our children and for the sake of God's glory.
There's so much grace there. That's a great word to end on. So grace and peace to you all, and may you find the rest that God desires to offer you in your life. So blessings to you. Thanks again.
See you all.